February 24th, 1989. A Boeing 747 loses a cargo door at 22,000 feet over the Pacific. 9 people get sucked out. 2 engines quit. The pilots landed anyway with a giant hole in the fuselage. When investigators tried the same thing in flight simulators later, they crashed every single time. The crew that saved 346 lives shouldn't have survived. And for 2 years, the authorities blamed a ground mechanic who did nothing wrong. This is the story of United Flight 811. The disaster Boeing knew was coming. The defect they could have fixed for $2,000. And the parents who built a model in their garage to prove the entire aviation industry was lying. United Airlines Flight 811 pushed back from the gate in Honolulu just after midnight, bound for Auckland, New Zealand. 337 passengers, 18 crew. A routine overnight flight that should have landed in time for breakfast. Captain David Cronin was flying his second-to-last trip before mandatory retirement. 59 years old, decades of experience. One more flight after this one, and he was done. 17 minutes after takeoff, the forward cargo door tore off the airplane. Not slowly, not with warning. 1 second, it was latched. The next second, it was gone. The explosive decompression ripped a hole in the right side of the fuselage so large you could see straight through to the ocean below. Seats, luggage, floor panels, 5 entire rows of seats just vanished into the night. 9 passengers with them. Gone. The debris cloud got sucked straight into engines 3 and 4 on the right wing. Both engines swallowed pieces of fuselage, seat frames, metal, and fabric. Both engines died. Captain Cronin shut them down manually before they tore themselves apart. A 747 can fly on 2 engines. Barely. But this 747 also had a 15-foot hole in its side, damaged control surfaces, and hull fractures spreading across the wings and tail. Flight engineer Randall Thomas left the cockpit to see what happened. The intercom was dead. He walked down the stairs toward the passenger cabin and hit a wall of freezing wind so violent it nearly knocked him over. He looked out into the cabin and saw open sky. Rows of seats just ended. Floor panels hung loose over nothing. The ocean was visible through the floor. He turned around and climbed back to the cockpit. The crew needed to know exactly how bad it was. It was worse than bad. Captain Cronin turned the crippled plane around. Honolulu was 17 minutes behind them. With 2 engines and heavy drag from the hole, the 747 was barely controllable. The flaps were damaged. The hydraulics were compromised. A normal landing speed for a 747 is around 150 miles per hour. Cronin came in faster, much faster. He had no choice. Slow down too much and the plane would stall and drop out of the sky. Come in too fast and he might not stop before the end of the runway. He landed it anyway. High-speed touchdown. Full reverse thrust on the 2 remaining engines. The plane stopped. On the runway. Not in the ocean. Not in a fireball. The evacuation took 45 seconds. 346 people walked off that airplane alive. 9 didn't. 9 people who were sitting in their seats, belted in, doing nothing wrong, got pulled through a hole in the fuselage and disappeared into the Pacific at 22,000 feet. Their bodies were never recovered. The National Transportation Safety Board opened an investigation immediately. February 1989. They had a disaster, a body count, and no cargo door. The door was somewhere at the bottom of the Pacific, 14,000 feet down. Recovering it seemed impossible. So the NTSB did what investigators do when the physical evidence is missing. They looked at maintenance records. They interviewed ground crews. They built a timeline. And on April 16th, 1990, they issued their official report. The cause? Ground crew error. A mechanic must have damaged the locking mechanism during a manual door closing operation. The locks were bent. The door wasn't secured. It blew open in flight. Case closed. Kevin Campbell's son Lee had been on that flight. Seat 12A. Business class. Lee had been sitting in economy at the gate in Honolulu, chatting with another passenger when his name got called for an upgrade. "Lucky you," she said, "sitting up in business." He laughed. Said if he was paying for it himself, he'd stay back in economy. Minutes later, business class ceased to exist. Lee Campbell was one of the 9. Kevin Campbell was a retired engineer. His wife Susan had been a flight attendant. They read the NTSB report and it didn't add up. The report claimed ground personnel had manually forced the door closed, bending the aluminum locking sectors in the process, which then failed to hold under pressure at altitude. But Kevin knew something the NTSB report glossed over. Boeing's cargo door used electric motors to drive the locks. If a mechanic manually overrode the system hard enough to bend metal, there would be visible damage. Stripped gears, bent actuator arms, something. The maintenance log showed none of that. So Kevin built a model in his garage. a working replica of the 747 cargo door latch mechanism. He wanted to see if the NTSB's theory was even possible. Could a mechanic accidentally bend those locks? He tested it over and over. You couldn't bend those locks by accident, but you could bend them very easily if the electric motor activated while the door was in the wrong position. The aluminum locking sectors weren't strong enough to resist the motor. They would fold like tin foil. Exactly the kind of damage the NTSB said proved human error. Kevin and Susan took their findings to the NTSB. They were polite. They were detailed. They were ignored. The board had already issued its report. Changing it would mean admitting they got it wrong, which would mean admitting they blamed ground crews without physical evidence. The Campbells kept pushing. They wrote letters. They hired lawyers. They contacted journalists, and they waited. September 26th, 1990. The United States Navy located the cargo door on the ocean floor, 14,100 feet below the surface. They brought it up in two pieces. October 1st, 1990, the second piece arrived. The physical evidence the NTSB needed was finally in their hands. The locking mechanism showed no signs of manual damage, no stripped threads, no bent actuator rods. But the S2 power isolation switch, the switch that was supposed to cut electrical power to the door locks once the door was secured, showed signs of internal shorting. The wiring harness had chafing damage, bare wires, the kind of damage that could send voltage to the door motors even when the switch was off, which meant the door could unlatch itself, electrically, in flight. Without warning, exactly what Kevin Campbell had been saying for over a year. June 13th, 1991. Another United Boeing 747 was sitting on the ground at JFK International Airport in New York. Maintenance crews were working on it. The forward cargo door suddenly opened on its own. No one touched it. No mechanic activated it. The door just opened. Investigators traced it to an electrical short in the same switch and wire harness system. The same defect. On the ground this time, so no one died. But it was the proof. Undeniable. The door could open itself. March 18th, 1992. The NTSB issued a revised report. They retracted the blame on ground personnel. The cause was a faulty electrical switch and worn wiring that allowed the door latches to receive power and unlock in flight. The exact failure mode Kevin Campbell had demonstrated in his garage 2 years earlier. The board spent 2 years blaming mechanics. Mechanics who showed up, did their job, signed the paperwork, and went home. Mechanics who had no idea they were about to be held responsible for 9 deaths. And the real problem was a design flaw Boeing had known about since 1975. 1975, 14 years before Flight 811. Boeing discovered that the aluminum locking sectors on early 747 cargo doors could fail under load. They issued a service bulletin recommending airlines replace the aluminum locks with stronger steel ones. The fix cost about $2,000 per airplane. Airlines were given up to 18 months to comply. Not exactly urgent. United had 31 Boeing 747s in its fleet. By February 1989, they had retrofitted exactly 6 of them, leaving 25 flying around with the old aluminum locks. Flight 811's airplane, registration N4713U, was one of the 25. After Flight 811, the FAA changed the deadline, 30 days. Every airline flying 747s had 30 days to replace those locks. What took 18 months before the disaster suddenly became a 30-day emergency after 9 people died? How does that even happen? The defect was known, the fix was cheap, the timeline was relaxed, and 9 people got sucked out of an airplane because saving $2,000 per plane was more convenient than doing the work on an accelerated schedule. That's not an accident. That's a choice. Captain David Cronin became a hero. Rightly so. The man landed a plane that simulator pilots couldn't. The National Transportation Safety Board ran simulations after the investigation. Professional test pilots. Flight 811 scenario. Huge hole. 2 dead engines. Damaged control surfaces. They crashed. Every single time. Not once. Not occasionally. Every attempt ended in a crash. The fact that Cronin brought it down on a runway is borderline miraculous. Cronin shouldn't have had to perform a miracle. The door shouldn't have failed. The wiring shouldn't have shorted. The locks shouldn't have been aluminum when Boeing knew steel was necessary. The FAA shouldn't have given airlines 18 months to fix a $2,000 problem. And the NTSB shouldn't have spent 2 years blaming the wrong people while the physical evidence sat at the bottom of the ocean. January 5th, 2024. Alaska Airlines Flight 1282. A Boeing 737 MAX 9 loses a door plug at 16,000 feet. Explosive decompression. Phones, seats, clothing, everything near the hole gets sucked out. The pilots land it safely. No one dies this time, but the failure mode is almost identical. A door that shouldn't open does. Investigators find missing bolts, Improper installation, quality control failures, the same pattern. Known risks, deferred maintenance, regulatory lag, and a manufacturer that keeps building planes faster than it fixes the ones already flying. Aviation experts pointed directly back to United Flight 811 when the Alaska door plug blew out. Same type of failure, same kind of decompression, same engine ingestion risk. The lessons from 1989 were supposed to prevent exactly this kind of disaster in 2024. They didn't. The TV show Air Crash Investigation remade the Flight 811 episode in 2024, 24 years after the original documentary. They called it Terror Over the Pacific, high-definition recreations, updated computer graphics, interviews with investigators and family members. The episode does a better job showing both sides. The NTSB investigators genuinely believed ground crew error was the most likely cause when they issued the first report. They weren't malicious. They were working without the physical evidence. But the episode also makes Kevin and Susan Campbell's perseverance clear. They didn't give up. They didn't accept the easy answer. And they were right. Kevin Campbell passed away in 2016. Susan followed in 2020. They never got their son back, but they got the truth. And they forced one of the most powerful regulatory agencies in the world to admit it was wrong. That matters. Not just for Lee Campbell, for every person who gets on an airplane and assumes the door will stay closed. So what actually killed 9 people on United Flight 811? A $2,000 part that wasn't replaced on time, an electrical switch that shorted because wiring inspection wasn't rigorous enough, a regulatory system that let airlines stretch an 18-month fix into multiple years, and a cargo door designed with aluminum locks when steel was already the known solution. 9 people died because cutting corners was cheaper than doing it right. Boeing is still building planes. The FAA is still writing deadlines. Airlines are still weighing cost against safety. And passengers are still sitting in seats, assuming someone else checked the doors. The only thing that's changed is how fast the investigators can pull data recorders and camera footage after it goes wrong. If this got under your skin, hit like and subscribe. Because stories like this don't stop. They just find new airplanes. United Flight 811 is what happens when every small decision to save time or money stacks up into a disaster no one saw coming. Except people did see it coming. Boeing saw it in 1975. The FAA saw it when they issued the service bulletin. United Airlines saw it every time they decided not to retrofit another plane. And a mechanic somewhere saw a work order and closed a cargo door that was already broken by design, never knowing he'd be blamed for it later.